Discussion on the roots of prejudice. We'll be talking about what our prejudices are, where they came from, how they're nourished, and perhaps even how to get rid of them. Let me introduce you to the core student participants in today's discussion. Ratnavi Iskandardinata, high school student, 17 years old, and also a talented dancer from Indonesia. From Japan, Yoriko Konishi, whose lovely voice you just heard. From time to time, we like you to get a sense of what we do in all those times when we aren't having serious discussions. We very often get Yoriko to dance or sing for us. She does both. From the United Kingdom, 18-year-old Judith Reeder. Judith's got a bit of a cold today. It did not come from swimming in the Atlantic Ocean, although she assures us that when she's in England, she does swim in the ocean during the winter. From the Philippines, Raul Contreras. Raul will be 16 years old, patriotically enough, on the 4th of July. He may admit some prejudices, but one he obviously doesn't have is a prejudice against women, or he wouldn't have been willing to appear tonight with 3 women being the only male on the program. Now, on this question of prejudice, perhaps we ought to start out by trying to define what you think prejudices are. What do you think prejudice is, Ratnati?
I think prejudice is a feeling of hate of people as a group or individual toward other people.
You say a feeling of hate. Do you think prejudice is as strong as hate?
Yes. When there is somebody, if he has a prejudice, then the answer will be, I hate such and such.
Well, I suppose that is true. What do you think prejudice is, Eureka?
Well, I found out that if somebody distinguishes between 2 white men, it is not prejudice. But if somebody distinguishes between a white man and a colored man, it is prejudice.
I would define prejudice as a rigid opinion formed about a certain thing before there has been a just examination of the facts.
When a person loses track of the dignity of the human soul and begins to judge others not on the basis of their being persons, but on the basis of race, creed, economic status, that is prejudice.
Well, is it fair to ask you whether you have any prejudices?
Well, I guess so, Mrs. Waller, and being brutally frank, I'm prejudiced against Japanese. Well, not to the extent that I hate them. No, not that way. But I got this, as a result of World War II. Because, I guess I was yet too young to understand what happened during those times. But I think that what my relatives and friends and the people who were witness to that unfaithful occasion, they just more than justify the fact. And I think it's justified for me to feel the same way because, I know that my people suffered very much under that rule.
You still as prejudiced against the Japanese as you were?
Well, 5 years ago, that prejudice of mine was, slightly fading away. But when Japan stubbornly refused to pay reparations to us, the prejudice began to brew again. But now I found out from close contact with Yoriko and other Japanese that Japan isn't ready to pay reparations yet. Because as Yoriko said, some of them and most of them even have to suffer the cold in the classrooms because they can't afford to heat the schools.
Yoriko, you've got any prejudices?
Well, I don't have any prejudice for Philippines, but many Japanese people hate Korea because the president of Korea made his own line on the public sea between Korea and Japan. And if the Japanese fishermen go over the line, they are caught by Korean people and they can't go home for a while. And we are trying to be friends for Korea.
Now that we've started, we better go on around the circle. Judith, you got any prejudices that you admit?
Yes, I suppose I'd better admit them, although I'm English. I have some very foolish prejudices, you'll probably laugh. For instance, as soon as I meet a person with red hair, I always put myself on my guard because I have a silly prejudice that all red-headed people have terrible tempers, that they're as passionate as the color of their hair. Oh, and then I have another silly prejudice. For example, when I first met the Australian delegate, Elizabeth Woodgate, who hasn't been on television, I was shocked by her accent, because to me it sounds just like a Cockney accent would in England. And I hope I'm not conceited or anything, but a Cockney accent in England, you know, most English people would shudder a little bit when they hear it. But she very frankly told me that she shuddered when she heard my accent. So I got paid back for that too.
Why did she say she did?
Oh, I think she imagines that, she said she really had to forget my accent in order to like me, because it was too formal. I gather most Americans think about that about the English as well. So.
Ratnati, it's your turn.
Well, sometimes I find prejudice against the Dutch people when in school when I learned the history and learned how the Dutch people treated Indonesian. And I have some other prejudices of my own. That's I hate people who are proud and who feel that he is the master of the other people and who thinks that he knows everything than anybody else.
Let's come back to you a minute, Ralph. Are there any prejudices in the Philippines between groups of people?
Yes, there are existing prejudices between groups of people. As a matter of fact, most of us still, are prejudiced against a group of hybrids, those who have more Spanish blood than Filipino blood in them, and we term them as mestizos. These incidents usually occur in the schools. As you know, I'm in a school run by Spanish monks, and we have a lot of those of that group studying in our school, and usually they are favored. But we think that we are right in saying that they are sort of aristocratic, conceited, and high-headed, and sore-headed, and all sorts of adjectives, and they have the foolish idea that they have the royal blood or royalty in them.
Well, how do you get along with these boys in school, Ralph? Are there any problems?
Well, frankly speaking, I don't get along with them pretty well. As a matter of fact, we usually fight with it.
Yes, Eureka.
Yes, Japan have had many American or European soldiers after the war, and most of them married with Japanese girls, not only formal wedding, and they made children who called hybrid. And I think the hybrids have nothing to be punished, but some grown-ups didn't used to treat as the Japanese children, and grown-ups also used to treat the mothers of children. Japanese people thought that the mothers of hybrids are not good, they are horrible, because they married with foreign people, foreign boys, and many Japanese people don't like to marry with foreign people because they live in different customs, and they consider with different way.
You still have a strong, may I say, prejudice in Japan against marrying people from other countries, don't you?
Well, yes.
Eureka, could you tell us something about the status of women in Japan? We hear the strangest things, and you've been telling me the strangest things. Could you tell us more about it?
Before the war?
Yes, and now.
Well, up to about 60 years ago, Japanese people thought that the white people are horrible because they are almost red hairs and everything is so big about bodies. And quite a few people still think so. And in Japan, we think that something to be beautiful must be small and delicate.
You could hardly apply the word delicate to some of the big soldiers we sent to Japan, could you? But I never knew that you looked down on us because we were big. That's very interesting.
We're always proud of if the Western men are tall and handsome. We consider that yes.
Oh, we're proud to be small and delicate.
What you said about skin color, Eureka, I've heard that the Chinese speak about us as pink people instead of white people. It's so much more difficult to be proud of being a pink person, isn't it?
Oh, yes, you're a pink person.
Might as well face it, Judith. Here we are.
I feel scarlet.
Ratnati, let's get
Yes.
Judith. Judith, since British has so many colonies and well, let's say nearly all over the world, how do you feel towards the people in the colonies? Do you have some prejudice?
No, I personally don't have any prejudice. At least I hope I don't. But I know that a lot of Europeans think of the Asians, for example, as rather lazy. I don't mean to be rude, but that used to be the impression we had. You know, when we started our colonization, we thought we were doing good to you. I know that you disliked, for example, in Indonesia, you disliked the Dutch there, but they probably thought they were helping you.
They were not helping us. See, you mentioned that we're lazy. We are not exactly lazy, but they didn't give us a chance, and we didn't get experiments to build our country.
Well, Judy, I don't think all Asians are lazy.
No, please, you're misunderstanding me. I said that was a general opinion. Maybe not now. I hope certainly not.
General opinion, but well, when it's not, it's sort of wrong to say that they are lazy. Let's just say that they've got very flat feet that they can't lift them up. Because you've got to consider, for example, the climate in most of the regions in Asia. Well, it's just but natural. You can't just work with all the warm climate around you. Of course, you'd always feel like fanning yourself, or going to an air-conditioned theater or something else where it's cold.
Is there not only this difference of climate that explains a difference in tempo, but is there a difference in philosophy, too, that perhaps we in the West haven't appreciated, I wonder?
Well, as far as I know it, and, well, I think you've mentioned it in this program, that Indians think that they should never soil their hands. And in the Philippines, I must admit that, well, we're sort of inclined to get white-collar jobs and swivel chairs. Most of us do, especially the new college graduates. We don't want to work with our hands. We want to have, well, big bosses and with pretty secretaries around us. That's the common tendency.
Could you give a proof that we are lazy?
Oh, gosh, now you put me in a corner. I was trying to give you an example. You criticize the countries which do, you criticize the Dutch, for example, but I know the British, when they started doing their colonization, they tried to help the countries they were in. But you think that we were butting in and taking away your opportunities?
Well, yes, I think so. I'll give an example about the Dutch, that we didn't get a chance to be educated, for example.
That was when the Dutch were there?
Yeah. And do you think if the people in the colony get a chance to get free, you will give them? Do you think?
Oh, now we're going right off the subject.
See, my friend from Malaya is very glad that Malaya will get the independence next year. She's very proud, and she tells everybody that Malaya is going to be independent next year. Do you think that if you do that to the other places, then you
yes,
will make them satisfied?
Well, we hope it will make them satisfied. Every country wants to be independent. That's only natural. But there comes a point somebody to decide whether they're ready to receive their independence. But I know we could go off on another long argument about that.
Maybe we can have what? I'm sorry, Ralph.
Well, I was about to ask them, what do they think are the most common or basic causes of our prejudices? Is it mainly skin color?
Well, maybe.
Do you mean, for example, taking the American people in the South?
I guess taking the American side of it, it's just that the white people don't want to mix themselves up with the colored ones.
So what about the colored people? Perhaps they don't want to mix with the white people either.
Well, what about, since you brought up the American race problem, I'd like to ask you, is it as bad as you thought it was going to be before you came, or is it better or worse?
Well, I think it's what I've seen here and what I've heard while I am here, and what I have read in the newspapers, it's just worse than I expected.
Don't you agree, Judith?
No, I don't agree. In England, we don't hear too much about the American problem, except, of course, when a certain case came up, and the Supreme Court decision, we heard a lot about it then. But not too much. And when I came here, I had imagined from the Tiller case that things would be really terrible in the South. And I found that there's a real feeling of optimism here. I stayed in a Negro family, and I was able to see the position, really a bird's eye view of it, you might say. And the first thing that impressed me was that the Negroes themselves were not happy about the situation, but were pleased. They were grateful for what progress had been made, and they were sure that the situation would continue to improve.
They said the 2 weeks you were in New Jersey that you stayed in a Negro
when
family?
I was in a Negro family. I know that was in the northern part, and conditions are better there. And I was very impressed with that. They said it would be a slow process, but things were gradually improving. It was a matter of breaking down tradition, and I was very happy to find.
I'd like to know some of your other experiences with, yes, Eureka.
I've never seen any evidences of racial prejudice in the United States, but I found out that most Negroes are laborers and they don't have a high position on business. But I was very glad when I saw the Negro girl in South Orange in Columbia High School, who was the vice president of the student council.
I'm glad you did too. Yes, right now.
Here in New York and New Jersey, I don't see any racial segregation or something like that. But when we stop in Williamsburg and we stop in Negro school, I saw it's very strictly. I mean, the Negro school go to the special Negro, and I was talking to some of the girls in the school, and I asked them how they feel about being segregated. But they said that they don't mind about that, and what they want is equal rights. And there are some places that they can go, such as restaurant or some clubs. And I think that since all Americans claim and emphasize that America is the most democratic country in the world, and as long as segregation exists, I don't think it's a democratic. I mean, pure democratic.
Well, adding something to that, isn't it that, in the Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag, you mentioned something about, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation indivisible under God, with liberty and justice for all. Well, the last phrase just doesn't suit everything. I mean, with this segregation problem here and the discrimination against colored people, how in the world could you have liberty and justice for all? And in one of my hospitality periods, I didn't expect that even the kids could carry it that far. I had the, privilege, I should say, of attending one of the dances sponsored by one of the civic groups. And I just noticed that, it was a big dance floor, and all the white kids were assembled on the left side. And the most, shall we say, not strategic part of the ballroom, all the colored boys and girls were in there. And I never saw a white boy asking a colored girl for a dance, nor did I see a colored boy asking a white girl for a dance.
I had a nasty experience too. When I first arrived here, and I happened to mention to a group of young people that I was going to stay with a Negro family, one of the boys got up and walked out of the room. And I felt awful. I thought, we're in the north now, not in the south. And then when we did go into the south, I really came against it pretty hard. We went into this big store, and I was in the ladies' cloakroom, and I was washing my hands, and I was with a group of the eastern delegates, the rather darker-skinned ones like Ratnati. And I was standing a little apart from them, and this lady came up to me, and she pulled me to one side, obviously assuming that I was American, and she said, what are these Negroes doing in here? And I was so cross, and I told her as calmly as I could that I was with them and who we were, and of course her attitude immediately changed. But it gives you sort of a nasty shock when you come up against it face to face. You read about it in the newspapers, you hear about it, but you don't really realize the significance of it until it hits you in the face yourself.
I think the major cause of the prejudice is skin color, and I think I don't know why, but I think the white people think that colored people have dirty skin, and they don't have progressive culture, so So the white people are the most great and wonderful person in the world. Thanks so much.
On this matter of skin color, if you were here in the summer, you'd see lots of Americans on all the beaches trying to get brown.
It's significant.
I wonder what that really means.
I think we white women have an inferiority complex. The Eastern women and the Negro women have a sort of reputation for being so beautiful.
I guess
We're a little
you just-
jealous of them.
I guess you just envy us colored people.
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, is there anything corresponding to that in...
Well, I think so, Mrs. Waller, because in the Philippines, it's just funny. There's a common tendency among women, well, those who have a dark complexion, I should say, or just a tanned one, or just a brown complexion. Well, especially these high society matrons. Well, even if they've got already wrinkles on their face, they still want to bleach their skin. Suppose you meet one right now and you say, oh, good morning, and you see that she's just tanned and brown. But after 3 months, you meet the same person, and with the usual society walk, and trying to be very dignified and cultured and everything. And you just notice that her face is lighter than before. And when you look at her hands and everything up to her arms, well, you'll be likable to exclaim, Holy Moses, because there's a real, very great difference, you see. She's about very light here, but you look at the arms and everything, and the lower part of the body, but gee, it's just a very great difference. It's colored here, but it's very light.
They really bleach their skins?
They do, Mrs. Waller. They
What about
pay.
Japan? Japanese women don't want to change it anyway, do they?
Some Japanese women, right, how does that? Dye their hair red.
Really?
Yes. They like red hair, but I don't like it.
What about Indonesia?
Well, as the Western people try to get darker skin, we try to get lighter skin. Where we prevent the sun. I mean,
But you're such a nice color now. I don't mind. I think it's
when we go out, then we use long sleeve blouse to prevent from the sun, so we don't get a very dark color skin.
Tell me, what are your governments, if anything, doing about problems of prejudice? You've each mentioned some prejudice that exists in your country. What are your governments doing to try to eradicate it? You mentioned the prejudice against hybrids. You mentioned the prejudice against hybrids, too. You haven't told us much about the position of women. Otherwise, by the way, let me ask you right here, are women any freer in Japan now than they were before the war?
Well, before the war, there was no democratic, and women belonged to men, and men controlled women in everything. And men had first opportunity to everything. Even getting out of the door, women had to open the door first, and the men passed first. And in the buses or theaters, men take seat first. And if there's no seat, women have to stand up.
Oh, I'd love to live in Japan.
Oh,
But they do that in America and England now.
Is it changing at all?
yes, quite changed. And just now women can vote, and women have equal opportunity in everything.
Judith, you were talking about your prejudice against Cockney accent a moment ago. Is that still very strong in England, this prejudice of the so-called aristocracy against the Cockney?
No, I don't think it's a very serious problem now, especially since the war. You know, this idea that the English speak either with a Cockney accent or else with a very aristocratic accent, that isn't true anymore. And we certainly don't despise people anymore if they speak with that. If you go into the House of Parliament now, you will often hear a North Country accent or a Welsh accent or even a Cockney accent. And we're proud of those kind of people because they are the people who got us through the last war, and nobody would dare say anything against them. In fact, it's the aristocratic accent which is the other side of the fence, and people laugh at that nowadays, I'm afraid. In fact, you may think that my accent is a little cultured, but I assure you back in England, I have not quite a Cockney accent, but still an accent.
At least you mean to say your schoolmistress would not totally approve of you?
Oh, no, I should be corrected.
Judith, I hate to think what's going to happen when you go back after 3 months here.
So do I.
You'll write me about that, won't you? I wanted to have time to ask you what you thought individuals could do in terms of eradicating prejudice. But our time's almost up. Anybody got a quick answer?
Well, I guess we should carefully examine the individual first before passing any judgment on him. And if we ever pass a judgment, we should be just with it.
That's a good note to end on. Thank you, Agati, Noriko, Judith, and Raoul. Next week, we're going to continue on this subject of prejudice with 4 delegates from Africa, 1 white and 3 colored. The delegates from the Union of South Africa, Gold Coast, Ethiopia, and Nigeria.